Hello, welcome to Neighborhood News. Today on my show I have David Madden. Welcome, Dave. He is the writing instructor at the Pawcatuck Neighborhood Center, and you have been doing that for at least 10 years, is that correct?
10 years. July 2009 was my first time leading a class, and I've been doing it ever since.
And so you meet on Fridays?
Friday mornings from 10:15 to around noon.
Okay.
Yep.
And the name of your class is Life Stories?
Life Stories, yes.
Okay, do you want to tell me a little bit about, if I were to join the class, what would it be like?
Well, when we gather together, I will read a prompt that I've come up with during the course of the week. The prompt for this coming week is on needs versus wants. What do we really need as opposed to what we want? And that sounds like a pretty simple question to ask, but it's really maybe not quite as simple. What do I really need in order to live a happy and fulfilling life, as opposed to what I just want? So I'll give them this prompt, and then usually what I have are a number of quotes having to do with the prompt.
Okay.
And then we'll write for about 20 minutes or so.
Okay.
And after we've written, people have a chance to share. We go around in a circle, or sometimes we'll just go as people raise their hands.
Right.
And people share what they've written, and then there's a brief discussion, usually about what they said, a thought that might have occurred to someone else as they listen to the response. There's always the option to pass if you would rather not read. And when people first come, that's an option they sometimes take. We have a little tradition that we've formed where if you do read the first time, we applaud you. Because it's not easy. It's not easy to share thoughts, because in some cases what they've shared is somewhat personal.
Right.
And that's never an easy thing to do. And it's a form of public speaking.
That's true.
And we'll sometimes have as many as 20 people there. And so to share what you've written about yourself with a group of people who you probably don't know can be a pretty daunting thing. And so people deserve a little applause when they do that.
They do.
Yeah. So it lasts from 10:15 to just about 12 o'clock.
So you said when you first meet, there are people that you don't know.
Yes.
But I would imagine that the group might get rather close.
Yes. Yes, they do. And I've seen friendships form where people get together outside of the class. There's one woman in particular who's had a number of parties at her house that people have gone to and had a wonderful time.
Right, right.
So that's an unexpected part of this. And I hadn't seen or anticipated, but there it is. When people get to know each other and share deeply with each other, it forms friendships.
So sometimes you might have a prompt like needs versus wants, which I actually think is a pretty deep prompt. I think that's pretty deep.
It is, yes.
And sometimes is the prompt less deep as far as?
There very well may be a prompt, as there have been in past years, on Halloween, with Halloween coming up. What are your memories of Halloween?
Right, right.
Or what experiences you had with growing things in a garden? Or what vacation trips have you taken?
Right, right.
But then you might have the next week a prompt on solitude. Do you appreciate being alone at times? And of course there's a difference between solitude and loneliness.
Right.
And what is the difference? Well, why is it there are times when we really appreciate being by ourselves, and other times that's difficult or even painful?
Right.
So it varies. I try to keep a variety in mind, to not have a period of time over several weeks where it's just deep stuff or just fun stuff.
Right, right.
I try to keep them guessing.
I know, I was thinking they must have a lot of anticipation, like, what is it today? What is he asking us?
That's what people sometimes say, what's in store for us today? And they'll have their pencils, their pens ready to go.
Right.
And I say sometimes, and I mean this, I sometimes worry that I'm going to come up with a prompt that nobody's going to respond to.
Has it happened yet?
It's never happened. It's never happened. Sometimes people will say, oh, this is just not connecting with me. And that's fine. If somebody were to sit and not write and just listen to what others had to say, that would be perfectly okay. But usually what will happen is that after they thought for a couple of minutes, they will start to write. So
and that's very interesting to me, because I would imagine that when you have a certain prompt, I'm hearing the prompt as, well, this is my answer, whereas someone else might hear it completely different. So what they write about would be very different, right?
And that's part of the fun, to see how people do respond differently. And of course, at the other end of that spectrum, it's also very interesting to see how people connect with each other by responding in similar ways. Of course, different experiences, but it's easy to see how there's a commonality between what one person has experienced at a certain time and place, and the way that evokes memories for somebody else. And so there's both differences in the way people respond, but there's also a common factor, which is very interesting to see.
So what you're saying is, say you have the prompt and then someone chooses to write, then is there a point where the listeners can respond if they want?
Yes.
So that might be something like, I had a similar thing happen to me, or that reminds me of when this happened.
Yes, that often happens, where somebody will read their response and somebody will raise their hand. Now, depending upon the number of people who are there, sometimes we have as many as 20.
Wow.
And of course, you can't spend the entire day there, so we sometimes have to cut that part short.
Right.
But if you have 10 or 12 people, then you can have a pretty good conversation going, and that's very interesting too. So the act of writing is I think a beneficial thing to do. Sharing with each other.
Right.
And you know, and then having the chance for a conversation where you go a little more deeply into just what's been said, and that can be affirming too. If somebody says something and a person responds by saying, "I know what you mean," that can be a powerful thing to hear an affirmation, to know that somebody else really understands what you're saying.
That's true.
Sure.
And sometimes it comes from very unexpected places.
Yes.
I would imagine sometimes you wouldn't realize that that person sitting across from me knows exactly how I felt. Or even if you've gone through something difficult and someone saying, that must have been so hard for you.
Yes.
You know, I mean, these aren't probably things that you might talk about all the time. And
even with close friends or family.
That's right.
Sometimes things are said that aren't said even with people you know well. And it doesn't happen all that often, but it's not unheard of for people to actually cry a little bit when they're sharing their thoughts. And also when people hear what's been said. More than once, the atmosphere that's created by everybody is something like therapy. And people have said that. Now, of course, I'm not a therapist in any sense of the word. I don't pretend to be, and I don't want people to think that's what I'm trying to do.
Right.
But as I understand it, isn't therapy, when you come right down to it, a matter of being listened to by somebody who's really intent and really wants to understand what you're saying. And of course, you have to be trained for that to become a real psychotherapeutic environment.
Right.
But simply being listened to.
Right.
And to know you're being understood, that's a very powerful thing. And so I suppose in a sense, in a non-professional sense, there is a certain amount of therapy that can happen.
Right.
Even though that's not what I'm aiming for.
Well,
enough people have said that makes me think
they've said that to you.
There's truth to that. Sure.
You must get a lot of positive affirmation from your students. I know that people love your class, Dave. And as a matter of fact, someone sent me a picture of a birthday party that they held for you.
Yes.
Because
should I hold it up?
Yeah,
here,
sure. Well, probably Frank will put it on when he'll put it on when we edit. But no, that's and I'm looking at the room right now, which is another picture, and that room has a lot of light. There's a lot of windows.
Yes.
I was telling you before the show that at the PNC, when the writing class is going on, we tend to say, "Oh, the writing class." We try not to walk in. Well, because we've noticed it's different than a Zumba or even Tai Chi. It's very quiet, and when people come in, it's like you all pause and. and I never knew what was happening in the class.
Sure.
And now that I'm listening to you, I'm hearing that there's a lot of respect that's going on in that room.
Yes.
And you maybe don't know what someone is talking about or what you're going to hear. And you've been talking a lot about when you speak and people listen and you're affirmed. It's something that we need. But I think we also need to hear people's stories because it builds compassion in us.
Yes. Oh, sure.
And it changes your view of other people in the world.
Sure.
And you're right. I think that even our own families, you have to be in a certain situation to talk about important things sometimes.
Sure. Well, people take this writing seriously.
Right, right.
Once the prompt is given and once they really started it, if there is an interruption, there's a certain amount of frustration. My train of thought's been broken, and I really want to be able to say this. I really want to be able to get this down on paper. This is important to me.
And you bring up a good point. I know that you were a teacher for 35 years.
35 years in the Groton Public School System.
Wow,
I'm very happy to say.
So you did a lot of correcting of papers and teaching students. And sometimes when people have taken an English or a writing class, they get the paper back and there's all these red marks.
The red marks, sure.
Now I know in your class, no one's concerned with spelling or it.
And people will express some fear about whether they're going to be judged according to how well they spell. And whether or not their writing is going to be good enough.
Right.
It always is.
Right. Right.
When people write from their heart, they write much better than they think they're capable of, and it comes through.
Right.
The stories that people write are, in some cases, just fascinating. And I've thought more than once that if you could have a director like Steven Spielberg or somebody take one of these stories of just average people, and write a script having to do with what they're sharing with us, it would be a really good story.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because my background was I was a caseworker for a very long time, and I would go into homes and I would interview people and talk to people, and I have to tell you, everyone's story was interesting to me because everyone's life is different, and it's not necessarily what happened in your life. In my mind, it's how did you react to it? Then what did you do? Because none of us go through life without having some sense, some suffering. But what do you do with that suffering?
That's right. Everyone has a story.
Yes, absolutely. And even it doesn't have to be suffering. It can be a very joyful story that you want to share, maybe about a wonderful childhood that you had. That you, I think of Laura Ingalls Wilder, for example. I mean, we learned about living on the prairie from her childhood experiences. So it's historical as well.
Sure.
But I want to get to your first novel.
Yes.
An Unknown Soldier, and congratulations.
Thank you.
So I read the book, loved it. I really did.
So
I loved it. And we were talking about it a little bit before the show. And I'm not going to give. Well, do you want to give a little synopsis of what the book is about?
Sure. A brief synopsis. This is a story of a World War II veteran, Peter Franklin, and his Vietnam-era son, Richard. They have been. They haven't been really together for a very long time, and it's never been explained. Nobody's ever explained why that should be. It's a mystery to Peter, why his son has essentially kept him out of his life. There's a quote at the beginning of the story. It comes from the Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus says, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." And that's a guiding light for me as I wrote this story, because that's just what's happening. There's no bringing forth. And the reason why there's no bringing forth for either Peter or Richard is because what they're keeping hidden from each other and from themselves is extremely painful, because it comes from experiences in war, both for Peter and for Richard. And so in not bringing forth, they've essentially, their relationship has been destroyed. It's non-existent. But their lives, especially Richard's, has been crippled by his inability to come to terms with what happened to him during the Vietnam era. And so the story has to do with their coming together for a weekend. And this was something that was done by Richard's wife, Jennifer. She doesn't really, she's always wanted to know what is it that's so troubles my husband, that he is the way he is. And of course she has no idea about this, so when she arranges for this coming together, she doesn't know what she's getting herself in for. But as a result of this time, things happen that have to do with the idea of bringing forth. So things are brought forth in this weekend, and that's really what the story is about.
It's right, and both of them have a sense of guilt in some way.
Oh, sure.
And one is a guilt from actions or inaction, and another is guilt from words. And I thought that was very interesting that we can carry things, a guilt because of what we did or what we didn't do, or even what we said.
That's right.
And what's beautiful about the story is that in the end, once they explain their situation to each other, they understand each other. And it's, you know, and I think that's probably comes a lot from your writing classes as well.
Yes, I would say that's definitely true. I never thought about it quite that way, but you know something, you're right. I think the past 10 years of meeting on a weekly basis and bringing forth, sometimes things that make us laugh, sometimes things that make us think, other times, from time to time, things that can make people cry. But the bringing forth of what's within us is something that's very important to do. And when it doesn't happen, there are circumstances under which it can really affect our quality of life and make us a lot less happy than we deserve to be, because we don't have that ability or courage to bring forth.
And in this case, the father and the son were lucky enough that they could talk to each other while they were both still alive, and so you can go on with their life. If I don't want to give away the story, but sometimes you have people who may have some sort of guilt, and the person is gone now, and they can't resolve that. That happens to everybody in their life at some point. And I would imagine that in your writing class, for example, when someone tells a story and then a listener can say, but you know, you were 10 then, or but that's how you felt during the Vietnam era when you were that age. That's not how you feel today.
And that does happen.
Right?
People will give that feedback, and who knows what effect it has. But I would have to say, to some extent, it will have some good effect for people to hear, I understand you, and it's not really necessary for you to carry this.
Right.
It's sometimes hard for us when we are the ones who are dealing with it to see that. But an objective person, and again, it'll be somebody we trust, because people do trust each other in this group, can give us an insight that we might not be able to have otherwise. Well,
sometimes we're so much harder on ourselves than we are on other people.
Always.
Too, right?
And I see you're saying that is something I want to hear, because I am hard on myself at times, like everybody else. But to hear you say that is affirming for me, because it's good to know I'm not alone in that. And I also want to say that Peter and Richard are fortunate that they had this opportunity. They're also fortunate they had Jennifer.
That's right. Who is?
Because without Jennifer, none of this would happen. So,
well, we were talking about that a little bit before the show as well, because Jennifer is the wife who brings them together. And I was noting that when this takes place, you made it a setting where they went away and to a house. And I was saying, you know, we all need to do that, like with our own families. Sometimes we have to go to go on vacation or even rent another place so that we can be alone for the purpose of talking to each other, because our lives are so busy. And that's what you're doing with the writing group. You're just allowing people to be together to tell a story. And it sounds like with your prompts, no one's quite sure what will evolve as far as the story goes. And another interesting point of your book is that the characters this takes place when the first daughter has gone away to college.
Right.
So suddenly they find themselves empty nesters,
Yes.
which with the senior center, you have a lot of people who are empty nesters or way beyond that, where you're looking back at life a lot.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, indeed. Sure. And it's not all that uncommon when people do find themselves in that empty nest. You can have a marriage that's gone on for 20, 25 years, and suddenly you look at your spouse and you think, I have nothing in common with this person, because what we did have in common was raising our children.
Right.
And so you wake up to the realization that, wow,
right.
I'm not sure this is what I want. And sometimes that can result in people separating. Other times they can come even closer together. But it certainly is certainly can be a crisis.
Right.
And of course, a crisis can be something that is good in a way, because it can bring up things that need to be discussed and that need to be illuminated. And sometimes it can be that will be what solves the underlying problem that the crisis is revealing.
Right, absolutely.
Sure.
Also, when kids leave the home, and we've spent our last 20, 25 years raising kids, we're often following their interests, which I think good parents do that. If your child likes music, you'll do music. But then you suddenly are facing, well, what was I interested in, right? Just
what do I want to do?
Exactly, right. Yeah. And so maybe that's where like writing comes into play, that I always wanted to write, and when you're in school, you have to read and write what's given to you, but now you have a chance to write what you want.
Well, the interesting thing about teaching, and in a sense I consider this to be teaching, different from what I did in public schools, but regardless of the circumstances or the environment, you never really know, or it's rare where you know that you've made a difference, because somebody will actually come and tell you, this made a difference. That does happen sometimes. It's happened to me a few times, but for the most part, you really don't know. And in the case of the neighborhood center, people usually don't come and say to me, this has made a difference in my life. Well, it has happened, but it's not all that common of an experience. So you just have to have a certain amount of faith, I guess, that what's being done will have a beneficial result.
Well, I think the fact that they keep coming to the class.
That's right. That's right.
And it's been going on for 10 years.
10 years, yes. Nobody is now there who was there at the beginning.
Okay.
But I've had people who have attended on Friday mornings for a number of years.
Wow.
Yeah, sure.
And I do have to thank you publicly, because Dave, you have done these classes for no pay, and in fact your participants will collect donations for the PNC.
Yes.
You've raised a significant amount of money for us.
Just last Friday, I keep track of, I've kept track over the past 5 years of the money that comes in. I write it on my little envelopes. And we just passed $4,000.
Wow, thank you.
$4,004.12 has been raised by the writing group for the Pawcatuck Neighborhood Center.
That's fantastic. Yes, thank you. So going to our food bank and helping people to keep the heat on and the electricity on, that helps a lot of people.
Yeah, that wasn't my idea. One of our participants suggested it. And actually her first idea was to bring in canned goods, which we did for a while, but then we decided it'd be even better to make a small donation.
That's
and
huge.
Each person gives $1. That's what it comes down to, $1 at a time. But overall that time, $4,000.
Thank you. And that's purely a donation, because I do want people to know that if they want to join the writing class, we want to offer that at no charge.
Right.
And so that leads me to my next question of, if anyone's listening and thinking they'd really like to come to your class, I'm sure it must be a little daunting for some people.
Oh, yes. More than one person has said to me, I thought about this for months.
Wow.
And I almost went, and then I just chickened out. And now that I'm here, I've done this a few times, I can see how wonderful it is. What made me wait?
Wow.
But the fear of the unknown is a very powerful fear.
Yes.
That's part of what Peter and Richard deal with, the fear of the unknown. What will happen if I reveal what actually has taken place?
Right.
So that fear, when it's overcome, is that's a real act of courage.
Yes.
And again, to share what you've written, to reveal who you really are in front of a group of people if you're there for the first time, who are strangers for the most part. Public speaking is difficult enough, but when you're publicly speaking about your own experience, you're putting yourself out there. So yeah, it can be kind of you're definitely outside your comfort zone, which has also been a prompt. But when you do go outside your comfort zone and you find that you succeeded to at least some extent, it's a very good feeling.
And so we know now that you don't have to talk right away.
No.
You can pass. You know you will be applauded once you do speak.
For the first time, yes, you'll be given your applause.
And also we know that everyone there was there for the first time themselves. So they know how nervous you are. Most people are not confident in their writing, I would imagine.
Yeah. No. And that could be part of the way they were taught, again, because if you were taught with the red marks, then you're going to think, gee, you know.
Right. Now, did you start journaling yourself when you were...
I did some journaling for a while, about 20 years ago. You know, I've always wanted to write, and I've never really been able to, I had never really been able to find a way to make that something I could do. But I found a book by Julia Cameron called The Artist's Way.
Okay.
And one of the things that she suggested in this book is to write, is to free write at the same time every day.
Okay.
You don't have to worry about whether it's, you know, makes sense, it can be gobbledygook, but just write something every day.
At the same time.
At the same time.
Okay.
And to do this in a deliberate way, not just once in a while, but to do it on a regular basis. And I did that for over a year.
Wow.
It's 20 years ago, so I'm not sure exactly how long ago it was, but it was at least a year. And that really opened up some pathways for me. Not because the writing was, you know, good in the sense that, you know, other people might enjoy reading it, but just the act of moving a pencil across a piece of paper and expressing my thoughts, my feelings, my experiences, that opened up some possibilities for me that not too long afterwards, when I joined the Writers' Roundtable at Avery Point at UConn, that was something formed by Cato McNichol here in Groton, who it was a group for playwrights. And I think because I had done that work with The Artist's Way, or had followed the advice of The Artist's Way, that opened up the possibility for me being able to write those plays, which I did with the group for probably, I'm going to say 3 or 4 years before they disbanded. So.
And I should mention that your book is dedicated to NIC Checkers.
Yes, it is.
Who, was he part of that group, or he helped you with writing plays?
He was not part of that group, but I attended a couple of classes on short story writing and playwriting with him. And when and actually An Unknown Soldier was first written as a play. And I wanted to have it something that could be performed on stage. But it's kind of a catch-22 when you're an unknown playwright. Unless people know who you are, they're not going to necessarily be interested in putting your play on.
Right.
But if you don't put your play on so you can become well known, then there's no way for people to become interested in you. So I would have I would have the actors and a director, but then I wouldn't have a venue. And then time would pass, I'd lose a venue, and then I might lose an actor. And for me, it was just a very frustrating experience. And I thought to myself, I want to be able to have complete control over this and not have other people, you know, because of their own schedules and their own needs, determining whether or not I can do this. And I mentioned this to Nick once, and we agreed that this story might be something that would work better as a novel. And so he was my guide for those 3 years. He's a wonderful teacher. You know, he's very demanding, and he has a manner which can sometimes be intimidating for people because he demands the best. And he wants people to give the very best writing that they can possibly produce. But if you can get past some of the gruffness, you realize he's really good at what he does. He's a really good teacher. He knows how to, when he comes across a particular part of the story that doesn't add up, it doesn't fit with what was written before, or it's not described fully as it could be, he knows how to recognize that and help you to do things to make it clearer and just better overall. So it's dedicated to him because really without him it wouldn't have been written.
Well, it's a wonderful book, and I would encourage anyone to read it, An Unknown Soldier. And also, Dave, thank you for being a guide to so many people in your writing classes.
Well.
And I would encourage anyone to come down to the neighborhood center on a Friday. You don't have to even make an appointment. Just come on down, join the class. And thank you so much for being on the show. I learned a lot about writing.
Thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks.